She killed more people than Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and Jack the Ripper combined. But you've probably never heard her name. Countess Elizabeth Bathory murdered 650 young girls between 1590 and 1610, making her the most prolific female serial killer in recorded history. And unlike other killers, she didn't hide in shadows. She operated openly in her castle, protected by wealth, nobility, and a husband who knew everything. But this isn't just a story about murder. It's about obsession, because Elizabeth Bathory didn't kill for pleasure, revenge, or insanity. She killed for beauty. She believed that bathing in virgin blood would keep her young forever, and for 20 years, she built an underground torture chamber, hired 4 loyal servants, and perfected her horrifying ritual. The truth remained buried for centuries, but in 2014, restoration workers at Čachtice Castle in Slovakia made a discovery that confirmed the legend. Behind a sealed wall, they found a hidden chamber filled with torture devices, blood-stained chains, and skeletal remains. The Blood Countess was real, and her story is far more disturbing than any horror movie. Before we descend into the darkest chapter of Hungarian history, if you're fascinated by the hidden horrors of the past, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because stories like this don't surface every day. Elizabeth Bathory was born on August 7th, 1560, into one of the most powerful families in Hungary. The Bathorys weren't just nobles, they were royalty. Her uncle was the King of Poland. Her cousin was the Prime Minister of Hungary. Her family owned more land than most European kingdoms, but wealth and power came with a dark legacy. The Bathory bloodline was famous for 2 things: brilliance and madness. Elizabeth's uncle Gabor Bathory was known for his cruelty. He once ordered 300 prisoners to be impaled alive just to test their endurance. Her aunt Clara Bathory was rumored to practice witchcraft and torture servants for entertainment. And then there was the family secret no one talked about: inbreeding. For generations, Bathorys had married other Bathorys to keep wealth and titles within the family. By the time Elizabeth was born, the genetic consequences were showing. Seizures, violent mood swings, and sadistic tendencies ran in the family. Elizabeth herself suffered from epilepsy. Historical records describe fits of rage, where she would attack servants, scream for hours, and lose consciousness. Some historians believe these seizures contributed to her violent behavior, but others argue that Elizabeth was fully aware of what she was doing, because even as a child, she showed disturbing signs. At age 9, Elizabeth witnessed her first execution. A Romani woman was accused of theft and publicly burned alive. While other children turned away in horror, Elizabeth watched with fascination. According to her governess's diary, young Elizabeth asked, "Does it hurt more if you burn them slowly?" That same year, Elizabeth's education began. Unlike most noble girls who learned embroidery and etiquette, Elizabeth was taught Latin, Greek, and German. She studied astronomy, alchemy, and medicine. Her tutors described her as unnaturally intelligent, but also disturbingly curious about pain. One incident stood out. At age 11, Elizabeth dissected a dead bird she found in the garden. When her tutor asked why, she replied, "I want to see where the soul lives." But the tutor noticed something else. Elizabeth had carefully collected the bird's blood in a small vial. But Elizabeth's childhood wasn't just about intellectual curiosity. It was also about learning the power of beauty. Her mother, Baroness Anna Bathory, was obsessed with appearance. She spent hours applying creams made from crushed pearls, gold dust, and, according to some accounts, animal blood. She taught Elizabeth that beauty was the ultimate power. Men conquer with swords, she would say. Women conquer with faces. And Elizabeth was beautiful. Pale skin, dark hair, piercing blue eyes. By age 12, she was already turning heads at royal courts. Marriage proposals flooded in from across Europe, but Elizabeth's parents had already chosen her husband, and this arrangement would give her the freedom to become a monster. In 1575, at age 15, Elizabeth married Count Ferenc Nadasti. He was 20 years old, a celebrated war hero and brutally violent. Ferenc earned the nickname the Black Knight of Hungary for his ruthlessness in battle against the Ottoman Empire. He was known for torturing prisoners, burning villages, and once nailing a Turkish soldier's turban to his skull as a joke. The wedding was one of the grandest events in Hungarian history. Over 4,500 guests attended. The celebration lasted for 3 weeks, and Elizabeth wore a dress worth more than most castles. But behind the pageantry, this marriage was a business transaction. The Bathorys and Nadastis were uniting their fortunes to become the wealthiest power couple in Eastern Europe. After the wedding, Ferenc gave Elizabeth a gift, Čachtice Castle in Slovakia. It was a massive fortress with over 100 rooms, secret passages, and most importantly, dungeons that no one ever visited. This castle would become Elizabeth's private hunting ground, but Ferenc was rarely home. As a military commander, he spent months, sometimes years, away at war, and during these absences, Elizabeth had complete control over the castle, the servants, and the surrounding villages. No one could question her. No one could stop her, and that's when the darkness began. At first, Elizabeth's cruelty seemed like typical noble arrogance. She would slap servants for minor mistakes, throw objects at maids who moved too slowly, force workers to stand outside in freezing temperatures as punishment. But these weren't just tantrums. They were experiments. Elizabeth was testing boundaries, seeing how far she could go without consequences. The answer was very far. One incident changed everything. In 1585, a young maid named Ilona accidentally pulled Elizabeth's hair while brushing it. Elizabeth slapped the girl so hard that blood splattered onto Elizabeth's hand, and as Elizabeth stared at the blood on her skin, she noticed something strange. The skin beneath the blood looked younger, smoother, more radiant. This moment, whether real or imagined, became Elizabeth's obsession. She convinced herself that blood had rejuvenating properties, and if a few drops made her skin glow, what would a full bath do? Historical accounts differ on what happened next. Some say Elizabeth consulted with her childhood friend Dorothea Sentes, a woman rumored to practice dark magic. Others claim Elizabeth's Aunt Clara introduced her to ancient blood rituals. But the result was the same. Elizabeth began her horrifying experiments. The first victim was likely a servant girl around 1590. Elizabeth ordered her to be brought to a private chamber, drained of blood, and disposed of in secret. The girl's family was told she ran away. No investigation followed, and Elizabeth realized something crucial. Poor girls disappeared all the time, and nobody cared. But here's the most disturbing part. Elizabeth's husband knew. Ferenc Nadasti was home during some of these early murders. According to testimony from Dorothea Sentes years later, Ferenc even participated. He showed Elizabeth more effective torture methods he learned in war. He helped design the underground chamber, and he made sure his wife was protected by threatening anyone who asked questions. Ferenc died in 1604, officially from an infected wound, but some historians believe Elizabeth poisoned him, because after his death, Elizabeth's killing spree accelerated beyond control. After Ferenc's death, Elizabeth was one of the wealthiest widows in Europe. She owned 17 castles, dozens of villages, and had an army of servants at her command. But she was also 44 years old, ancient by 17th century standards, and her obsession with youth had become a full-blown psychosis. Between 1604 and 1610, Elizabeth transformed Čachtice Castle's basement into what can only be described as a medieval torture lab. Historical records and trial testimonies reveal The horrifying details. The main chamber was accessed through a hidden door behind the castle kitchen. Stone steps descended 30 feet into a vaulted room lined with iron hooks, chains, and drainage channels carved into the floor. The walls were covered in strange symbols, some alchemical, some religious, some that no scholar could identify. In the center of the room stood a marble bathtub, not decorative, not luxurious, purely functional. It had special grooves designed to collect and channel blood. Next to it, a large wooden rack with leather straps, and surrounding the tub, a collection of devices that would make modern pathologists sick. Elizabeth's 4 main accomplices helped run this operation. Dorothea Sentes, Elizabeth's childhood friend, known as Dorco. She was responsible for recruiting victims and disposing of bodies. Testimonies describe her as cold as winter stone. Ilona Joe, Elizabeth's personal nurse and the one who actually performed the bloodletting. She had medical training and knew exactly how to drain a body without killing the victim too quickly. Katalin Benetsky, a local washerwoman who cleaned the chamber and laundered blood-stained clothes. She later testified that she washed countless red garments every week. Janos Uvari, a dwarf manservant who lured victims to the castle with promises of employment. He was nicknamed Fico and was described as unnaturally persuasive. Together, this team perfected a horrifying system. Elizabeth's victims followed a pattern. She targeted peasant girls aged 9 to 26 from surrounding villages. The recruitment pitch was always the same. Work at Čachtice Castle, learn valuable skills, earn good wages, and maybe even meet a nobleman to marry. For poor families, this seemed like a miraculous opportunity. Janos Uvari would visit villages during harvest festivals, church gatherings, and market days. He was charming, well-dressed, and carried official documents with the Bathory seal. Parents trusted him. Girls dreamed of escaping poverty, and once they entered the castle gates, they never left. The routine was methodical. New girls were given clean clothes, fed well for the first few days, and treated kindly. This served 2 purposes. It fattened them up, more blood volume, and gave Elizabeth time to select her favorite. She preferred girls with fair skin, blonde or red hair, and unblemished beauty. Once selected, the victim would be summoned to Elizabeth's private chambers. Usually late at night, she'd be told the Countess wanted to inspect her for the position. But instead of an interview, the girl would find herself in the underground chamber. What happened next has been documented through trial testimonies from the 4 accomplices, who all confessed in graphic detail. The girl would be stripped naked and chained to the wall. Elizabeth, also naked, would enter and personally inspect the victim. She'd touch the girl's face, hair, and skin, obsessively checking for youth and vitality. If the girl struggled or screamed, Elizabeth became more excited. Ilona Joe would then make strategic incisions. Wrists, neck, inner thighs, areas with major blood vessels. The victim would be positioned over the marble tub as blood drained. This process could take 15 to 30 minutes, during which the girl remained conscious and screaming. Elizabeth would wait until the tub was sufficiently full, approximately 2 to 3 liters of blood. Then she would step into the tub and bathe. She'd submerge her face, rub blood into her skin, and even drink small amounts. She believed this ritual would absorb the victim's youth directly into her body. But the horror didn't end there. Elizabeth reportedly kept victims alive as long as possible, draining them over multiple sessions. Some girls were imprisoned in the chamber for weeks, drained periodically like human wells. When they finally died, their bodies were buried in secret graves around the castle grounds, burned in the courtyard furnace, or dumped in nearby rivers. The most disturbing testimony came from Katalin Benetsky, who described Elizabeth's behavior during these rituals. She would laugh, not a mad laugh, but a satisfied one, like a woman enjoying a warm bath after a long day. If you're still watching, you're witnessing one of history's most disturbing true stories. This isn't fiction. These are documented trial records from 1611. If you want to explore more hidden archives of history's darkest secrets, subscribe now, because what happens next will shock you even more. By 1609, Elizabeth Bathory had been operating her torture chamber for nearly 20 years, but her obsession was getting worse, not better. Despite bathing in blood hundreds of times, she was still aging. Wrinkles appeared, her skin sagged, her hair turned gray, and this failure drove her into a rage. Elizabeth became convinced that peasant blood wasn't pure enough. She needed noble blood, virgin blood from aristocratic girls. This decision would ultimately lead to her downfall. Elizabeth began targeting daughters of lower nobility, girls whose families had titles but little money. She offered them positions as ladies-in-waiting, promising education, social connections, and dowries. Unlike peasant girls who disappeared without investigation, these girls had families who could demand answers. The killing methods also escalated. Elizabeth's frustration with her aging reflection made her increasingly sadistic. Testimonies describe new torture techniques. The Iron Maiden, a coffin-shaped device lined with spikes. Victims were locked inside and slowly compressed until spikes penetrated their bodies. Elizabeth would collect the blood that dripped from the bottom. The Star Kick. Victims were covered in honey and left outside in summer for insects to devour, or in winter to freeze to death. Elizabeth believed the purified blood from prolonged suffering was more potent. Burning. Girls were forced to hold hot coals or had burning candles inserted into their mouths and other orifices. Elizabeth collected blood that bubbled from burn wounds, believing heat activated its properties. Biting. In fits of rage, Elizabeth would bite chunks of flesh from victims' faces, necks, and shoulders. Multiple testimonies confirm she consumed human flesh, though whether for ritual purposes or pure sadism remains unclear. But the most disturbing escalation was psychological. Elizabeth began inviting other noble women to watch. She turned murder into entertainment, hosting private gatherings where aristocratic ladies would observe tortures while drinking wine. Some reportedly participated. These witnesses would later be crucial, but not in the way you'd expect. By 1610, Elizabeth had killed approximately 650 girls. The exact number comes from a list found in her private chambers, a handwritten ledger where she recorded each victim's name, age, and date of death. She kept this list like a trophy collection, proof of her dedication to beauty, but cracks were forming in her perfect system. Bodies were piling up faster than her servants could dispose of them. The smell from the castle became notorious. Local priests noticed a dramatic drop in young girls attending church, and most dangerously, noble families were starting to ask questions about their missing daughters. In March 1610, a Lutheran minister named István Magyari wrote a letter to Matthias II, King of Hungary. In it, he detailed suspicious disappearances of girls near Čachtice Castle and accused Countess Bathory of murder. This letter should have triggered an immediate investigation. It didn't. Elizabeth Bathory was too powerful, too wealthy, and too connected. She was a widow of a war hero, a cousin to the Prime Minister, and, most importantly, she held massive debts owed by King Matthias himself. The king owed Elizabeth over 17,000 gold florins, equivalent to millions today, borrowed to fund wars against the Ottomans. If Elizabeth died or was arrested, that debt would become legally enforceable by her heirs. But if she was declared insane or criminal, the debt could be dissolved. King Matthias had a financial incentive to ignore the accusations or to handle them very carefully. But then Elizabeth made a critical mistake. In December 1610, She killed 4 noble girls in a single week. Their bodies were discovered by a local magistrate before Elizabeth's servants could dispose of them, and these girls' families had connections to the Habsburg court in Vienna. The king could no longer ignore it, but he also couldn't afford a public trial that would expose Elizabeth's crimes and his own financial dealings. So he devised a plan: raid the castle, gather evidence, make the servants confess, but never officially charge Elizabeth herself. On December 29, 1610, Count György Thurzó, Elizabeth's own cousin and the Palatine of Hungary, led a raid on Čachtice Castle. What they found was beyond imagination. Count Thurzó's men entered Čachtice Castle expecting to find evidence of a few murders. What they found was a factory of death. In the main courtyard, they discovered 1 girl dead and another dying from blood loss. In the underground chamber, they found 2 more girls chained to the wall, their bodies covered in cuts and burns. One was already dead, the other was barely conscious. But the true horror was revealed when they explored the castle grounds. Beneath the courtyard, they found a mass grave containing 50+ decomposed bodies. In the forest behind the castle, another burial site with 30+ skeletons. In the castle's furnace, they found bone fragments and teeth, and in the nearby river, local fishermen reported finding bones regularly for years. The 4 servants were immediately arrested. Under interrogation, which included torture, they all confessed in detail. Dorothea Sentes provided the most damning testimony, describing specific murders, methods, and Elizabeth's personal involvement. She also revealed the existence of Elizabeth's list, the ledger of 650 victims. When confronted with this evidence, Elizabeth didn't deny it. According to Count Thurzó's report, she simply said, "They were nobody, just peasant girls. I am Countess Bathory. I do as I please." But here's where the story takes a strange turn. Despite overwhelming evidence, Elizabeth Bathory was never officially charged with any crime. She was never put on trial, and she was never publicly named as a murderer. Why? Because a public trial would have been a scandal that destroyed multiple noble families, exposed the king's debts, and embarrassed the entire Hungarian aristocracy. So they made a deal. Elizabeth would be imprisoned in her own castle for life. The 4 servants would be executed publicly and blamed for everything, and all records of the case would be sealed for 100 years. Elizabeth's name would be protected, her estates would remain in family control, and the king's debts would quietly disappear. On January 7th, 1611, in the town square of Beča, Slovakia, Elizabeth Bathory's 4 servants were executed in front of thousands of spectators. Dorothea Sentes and Ilona Jo had their fingers torn off with red-hot pincers as punishment for hands that killed, then were burned alive at the stake. Both women screamed Elizabeth's name as they died, begging her to save them. She never appeared. Katalin Banetsky was beheaded because she cooperated with investigators and showed remorse. It was considered a merciful death. János Ujvari was also beheaded, though some accounts say he was castrated first as punishment for luring innocent girls. The official charges read against them stated, for assisting in the murder of 80 girls, not 650, just 80. This number was carefully chosen to be shocking enough to satisfy public anger, but small enough not to seem unbelievable. Elizabeth Bathory watched none of this. She remained in Čachtice Castle, which was now her prison. Elizabeth's punishment was unique in history. She wasn't imprisoned in a dungeon or tower. She was bricked into her own bedroom. On January 10th, 1611, masons sealed every window and door in Elizabeth's private chambers, leaving only a small slot for food and waste removal. No visitors, no communication, no sunlight. Just 4 walls and darkness. Elizabeth Bathory lived in that sealed room for exactly 3 years and 7 months. What went through her mind during that time, we'll never know. She left no diary, no letters, no final confession. Guards stationed outside reported hearing her scream, occasionally, but mostly silence. Some accounts claim she continued to demand blood, telling guards through the food slot that she needed it for her skin. Others say she descended into complete madness, talking to invisible people and scratching at the walls. On August 21st, 1614, guards noticed that Elizabeth hadn't taken her food for 2 days. When they broke down the wall, they found her dead on the floor, face down. She was 54 years old. The official cause of death was recorded as unknown. No autopsy was performed. She was buried quickly in an unmarked grave, and her family forbade any mention of her name. For the next 100 years, speaking about Elizabeth Bathory in Hungary could result in arrest. So what's the truth about Elizabeth Bathory? Was she really a vampire-like serial killer who bathed in blood, or was she a powerful woman destroyed by political enemies? Modern historians are divided. Some argue the entire story was fabricated to seize Elizabeth's wealth and eliminate the king's debts. They point to no physical evidence was ever preserved, no blood-stained tub, no torture devices. No bodies were officially exhumed. All testimonies came from tortured servants who would say anything to stop the pain. No trial ever occurred, which is suspicious for such serious crimes. Elizabeth's political enemies had clear financial motives to destroy her, but others argue the evidence is overwhelming. Multiple independent witnesses, servants, priests, villagers, corroborated the same details. Elizabeth's own ledger listed 650 victims by name. Mass graves were discovered and documented. The pattern of disappearances matches the timeline exactly, the most likely truth. Elizabeth Bathory did kill, but probably not 650 victims. Modern estimates suggest 30 to 100 deaths are historically credible. The number was likely inflated to justify seizing her assets and satisfying public demand for justice. But even if we accept the lower number, that still makes Elizabeth Bathory one of history's most prolific female serial killers. And the bloodbathing. That detail appears in too many independent sources to be completely fabricated. The story of Elizabeth Bathory isn't just about one woman's madness. It's about how power, wealth, and beauty obsession can corrupt absolutely. It's about how society protects the elite even when they commit horrific crimes. And it's a reminder that the pursuit of eternal youth has always been humanity's darkest obsession. In 2014, when restoration workers found that hidden chamber in Čachtice Castle, they also found something else. Scratches on the walls. Hundreds of scratch marks carved by fingernails. Some were grouped in sets of 7, possibly a way of counting days. Others formed words in Hungarian. God forgive me. I am sorry. I am cold. Were these marks made by victims or by Elizabeth herself during her final years of imprisonment? We'll never know. What we do know is that Elizabeth Bathory's legacy influenced countless vampire legends, horror stories, and modern true crime. She became the template for female serial killers in fiction, beautiful, aristocratic, and obsessed with youth. But unlike vampires, Elizabeth Bathory was real, and that's far more terrifying than any legend. If you enjoyed diving into this hidden archive of history's darkest secret, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because history's most disturbing stories are often the ones they tried to bury forever.